Before we present the 2013 Donald D. Engen Trophy to the Tuskegee Airmen, Colonel Charles McGee, Dr. Ivan Ware, and Mr. William Fauntleroy, Jr., we felt that you would like to hear from these warriors firsthand of their thoughts and experiences. Speaking on behalf of the airmen will be Colonel McGee. Allow me also to point out that two of the original Tuskegee Airmen recently joined District of Columbia leaders for a Veterans Day wreath-laying ceremony. Washington resident William Fauntleroy, and he just shared with me that he was one of the designers of our metro, so if you're happy with it, applaud him. If you're not, don't tell him. And also Major Lewis Anderson were honored during a Veterans Day ceremony at the city's African American Civil War Memorial and Museum. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton presented Major Anderson with a bronze replica of the Tuskegee Airmen's Congressional Gold Medal. Major Anderson, 88 years young, was part of the ground support for the Tuskegee Airmen. Mr. Fauntleroy, Jr. was honored with the Congressional Gold Medal in 2007. At this time, I'd also like to share a little more history about the years leading up to World War II, where racial injustice throughout American society led to African Americans being denied military leadership roles and skilled training. Before 1940, African Americans were barred from flying the U.S. military. Pressure exerted by civil rights organizations and the black press, as well as the threat of an approaching war, resulted in the formation of an all-African American pursuit squadron based in Tuskegee, Alabama, 1941. They became known as the famous Tuskegee Airmen, and they overcame segregation and prejudice to become one of the most highly respected fighter groups of World War II. They proved conclusively that African Americans could fly and maintain sophisticated combat aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen's achievements, together with the men and women who supported them, paved the way for full integration of the U.S. military. Now, I'd like to reintroduce Sean Cassidy. Captain Cassidy, first Vice President of the Airline Pilots Association, will more formally introduce our guest speaker, Colonel McGee. Captain Cassidy is no stranger to military operations. Prior to his experience, his airline experience at Alaska, he received an officer commission in the United States Navy, assigned to Whidbey Naval Air Station from 1989 to 1995. Captain Cassidy performed duties as a carrier-based EA-6B pilot in support of numerous military operations, including those in the Persian Gulf, and finished his naval career flying the C-9 as an officer in the reserves. I learned also Tom Hendricks flew fighter jets off and off the Midway, and I'm akin to that because I served on the carrier Midway. And only yesterday did I learn that Captain Cassidy actually flew the last jet on the Midway before it was retired. So a commendable feat, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Captain Sean Cassidy.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, David. And boy, what an honor it is to stand here before everybody. And I'd just like again to express the amazing opportunity and the thanks on behalf of the Airline Pilots Association for the opportunity to talk to this crowd, especially with this distinguished audience in the red jackets and also from elsewhere all around the aviation community. One of the things David asked me to do, he thought it would be appropriate, is if I could strike some kind of personal connection, kind of spanning the years from 1942 to 1943, 7 decades later to present. And when we came out to D.C., when my family came out to D.C., I had been out here for a couple years, and I was looking for every enticement to make sure that my two sons and my wife would be happy out here. So the first thing I did was I took them to the Udvar-Hazy Center, to the Flight Museum, and my son is doing fist pump right now. And so we walked into Udvar-Hazy, and the first thing you saw was a P-40 Warhawk sitting up suspended on cables. And my son Connor and my sons Connor and Ian boy, I didn't miss a beat and they were gone, running right towards that and looking up at the thing as if it was a holy grail. You know, Space Shuttle, nice, SR-71, nice, but no, it was the P-40 that really got them. The last thing they did before they left the museum was, of course, the obligatory trip to the souvenir shop. And I'll give you one guess what the single model that they wanted the most. It was a Red Tail P-51. And even going further than that, the thing that really enticed them to want to stay in D.C. was when we went out and purchased a ceiling fan, which is modeled in the form of a cowl of one of the Warhawks with the blades as the propellers. So that's the kind of impact that you gentlemen have had on my family, as well as my wife, who's also a former Air Force pilot, a military pilot. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to these three distinguished gents here, and then I'm going to turn the stage over to Colonel McGee to moderate the discussion, because I'm sure now you'd rather hear more about them than me. So to my right, I've had the pleasure of having the ability to chat with Dr. Ivan Ware. He enlisted in the reserves in 1942 and was activated in 1943, and he became an ordnance man and landed at this little place I'm sure nobody's heard about called Omaha Beach in July of 1944, which actually was D+23, 23 days after the initial push in, and talking to Dr. Ware, the zone was very much hot. He received battle stars for Normandy and also for operations in northern France, and where there was a very well-known operation known as the Red Ball Highway, where they were really putting a lot of munitions in support of the Allied phase of the invasion. He was the first ROTC class battalion commander at Howard University, just up the street, and he's had a succession of increasing positions of importance in the military. And then he actually came back to Howard University. He went out and got a doctorate, and a master's and a doctorate as well, and ended up becoming a professor of aerospace at Howard, where he retired after 30 years of service. To my left, far left, is, again, Mr. William Fauntleroy. And I'm kind of bummed out because David took my punchline for the Metro system, which I just heard from Dr. Ware, so he beat me to that. In 1944, Mr. Fauntleroy was inducted into the Army Air Corps. And he began training shortly after that in July. And he went through 10 weeks each of ground school, of primary training, of basic training, and advanced training. And I would bet money that one of the first days of your training started much like the same first day of our training, where you had an instructor up there at the chalkboard drawing a lift over a drag curve and talking about Bernoulli. I would guess it's probably no different then than it is right now. Mr. Fauntleroy, unfortunately, or depending on how you look at it, the war was just winding down, so he was discharged after going through the full suite of training. And then he went back over to Howard University, where he got an engineering degree. And I think you know the rest of the story about the Metro system. One other little interesting factoid, though, is that his brother happens to be a person named Walter Fauntleroy, who was the predecessor for Eleanor Holmes Norton as the delegate to the congressional delegation in D.C. So a proud tradition of advocacy, which he continues to this day. Now on to is what as everybody is called the rock star here, is Colonel Charles McGee. And I noticed that in his bio they said that World War II interrupted his education at the University of Illinois. I would beg to differ. I think World War II actually enhanced your education, and it gave you an education that you can never possibly get sitting in academia. When I was looking through Colonel McGee's bio, boy, you know, I couldn't begin to cover all the notable accomplishments that he's had, but just as a few things. He was active duty for over 30 years. He joined the enlisted reserves in 1942 and received his wings as a second lieutenant single-engine fighter pilot in 1943. His accomplishments include over 6,300 hours, command pilot hours, set numerous records in a career span, a military career span that transcended from World War II to Korea to Vietnam, numerous command positions as well, including being in command of fighter squadrons, support squadrons, reconnaissance, missile support squadrons, and also an Air Force base, Richards Gabar, that I've actually flown to in the past. Awards include Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross, multiple air medals, and the French Legion of Honor, just to name a few. And of course, as with many of the Tuskegee folks who are here, we cannot forget the Congressional Gold Medal. In addition to the paying it forward category, he's also remained very, very active in public service beyond his military career, notably in numerous positions around Kansas City. So, in the way of introduction, I think it's absolutely amazing to note the accomplishments that these men have made and also the other folks that have joined the Tuskegee Airmen Organization. But I think the other thing that's incredibly important to note is that even beyond their military service, even when they took off their uniform, they've continued to pay it forward. They've continued to demonstrate that it didn't matter what the color of your skin was, what gender you come from. It mattered what's up here, what your smarts are, what your grit is, and what your performance, your accomplishments are. That's what's really defined this group. And now I'm looking forward to turning the floor over to Colonel McGee to listen to him tell a little bit about their background, and hopefully you'll have some very good questions for the group. Colonel?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to share a little time with you. Although I didn't bring my hour speech, I understand. That wasn't, but hopefully you may have a question or two after I talk. But the real pleasure here is what we have in common: love of aviation, love of our country, and the desire to keep America the #1 country in aviation and aerospace. And to share that, I think, is most important, and also beyond that is mentoring our young people to take their rightful place in aviation and space, because we want to remain the #1 country in the world. But since we're sharing in as a family our love of aviation, who are we? I think all of you probably heard Red Tails. That's part of it. So I'll say a few words about the total experience. I call it in 5 phases. Phase 1 was, can we train mechanics? Because the policy said we can't use a black pilot without a black mechanic. So the first Tuskegee Airmen were the mechanics trained at Chanute Field, Rantoul, Illinois. They did very well, and they said, gosh, we need an airfield to train the pilots. Lots of airfields around the country, but found some dollars to build Tuskegee Army Airfield. Phase 1 of the experience was that first authorization. The Army said, we've studied the issue, it isn't going to work. 99th Pursuit Squadron, trained in 42, combat ready 42. Their training really started in 41, but on into 42. They thought, well, Liberia ought to be the place to send a black unit, because no white commander wanted them. Well, they realized Liberia was a little distant from the front line. They eventually sent the 99th into combat, so they had a year of combat flying the P-40, North Africa, Sicily, into Italy. Well, 99th's going to need some replacements, so after they're gone, training continued. And gosh, the 100th, the 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons are part of this. But remember, those 30 pilots for each of those organizations needed support, because the bottom line said, and all of the necessary support. Quite a few folks involved beyond those pilots. For that 99th, some 400. That same goes down the line for the other squadrons. Because besides the mechanics and technicians, you need medical, communications, administration, supply, all these skills. So although the 99th went into combat, segregation went over. They had all of their own support, attached to white groups, but not stationed with them. Separation was still taken overseas. One little bit of integration, though, during that time frame, when the 99th moved out of Sicily into Italy, they were assigned to the 79th Fighter Group. Bill Bates was glad to have more pilots and more planes to do the job. And that integration lasted for a period during the Anzio beachhead landing. Well, those three squadrons that followed the 99th are phase 2 of the experience. 332nd Fighter Group. Combat ready P-40? No, you're going to fly a P-39 Bell Air Cobra. You're going to go do harbor patrol, Naples Harbor, waterways up to the Anzio beachhead for 12th Air Force. That job was done, but our bombers now flying from southern Italy, flying in deeply into German defended territory, were receiving tremendous losses. You know, they thought we had enough guns on our B-17s and B-24s to protect them. Wasn't true against the German Air Force. They needed escort. 4 groups in 12th Air Force were picked. 332nd Fighter Group was one of them, moving from the Naples area of Italy to the Adriatic side. P-39, do escort? No way. P-47 Thunderbolt. Had that Thunderbolt for about 3 months. P-51 Mustang. Premier aircraft for the work to be done, particularly. Have to qualify it, though, with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. 332nd Fighter Group, when they got the P-51, is when the red tails came about, because there was a yellow tails, a candy stripe, a checkerboard square. We needed identification from the gunners on those bombers, plus it helped us too. We didn't want to have one of our own aircraft in our gun sight. But the story of the 332nd Fighter Group is expanded because when they got the P-51 in July of '44, ground war against Germany and Italy was very much phased down. 99th was then assigned to the 332nd Fighter Group. 4 squadrons, 332nd Fighter Group, flying red tails from July '44 to just before the war ended, and then they did deactivate the 302nd, go back to standard 3 squadron group. That's the story of the red tails. Coming back home, segregation still. When I graduated in June of '43, my instructor said, you know, it's too bad they don't have a bomber program for you guys, because I think you'd make a good bomber pilot. I'm still wondering what I did. But during that escort work, I was happy to be a fighter pilot. You know, the bombers had to follow the leader and ride through that flak blanket. They couldn't move about very much. And fighter pilots could climb a little higher, move out a little farther, still do the job. But I salute those bomber pilots, and I was glad that I was a fighter pilot. But what the instructor said, he didn't know that a few months later they started medium bomber training at Tuskegee Army Airfield. Phase 3 of the experience. 477th Bomb Group, medium Mitchell B-25. Yes, pilots, larger crew, because you had a co-pilot, navigator, larger crew, therefore the same, all of the necessary support. That became a part of phase 3 of the experience. Now, how many of you heard that there was a program called Double V during the war? Well, I see a few hands or two. Double V was one of our black newspapers saying, hey, we're fighting 2 wars. Number 1, to defeat Hitler in Europe and fight the Japanese. And number 2, fighting against racism here in America. This became an important part of that phase 3, 477th Bomb Group. Because in their preparing to go to the Pacific, they ran into commanders that want to maintain segregation. And Colonel Selway, with General Hunter's okay, said, on my base, trainees can only use the facilities I designate. Who was in training? 477 Bomb Group, black pilot and black crewman. Well, Colonel Selway realized because some of the officers were trying to use the so-called White Officers Club, and he called them in and said, I'd like you again, read my regulation, sign this piece of paper that you'll abide by it. 101 refused, and were immediately shipped off from their base to Godman Field, Kentucky, put behind barbed wire, lights, dogs, guns. Of course, that brought a hearing. Washington's good about hearings. Colonel Selway was wrong, but the Army didn't change their policy. They said, we'll have a integrated group. We'll keep the 16th and 6th, 17th Bomb Squadron, reactivate the 99th, because the 332nd was closed out when the war ended in Europe. We'll reactivate the 99th, and wow, Godman Field's too small. Opened up Lockburn Air Base just south of Columbus, Ohio. Most of you know as Rickenbacker today. Training at Tuskegee ended in '46. We were all sent to Lockburn. So that integrated 477th group was the fourth phase of the experience. While there, our United States Air Force was born, 1947. And, well, the Air Force said this, we need to use our people based on training experience, not their color of skin or happenstance of birth. And we're not getting enough money to maintain Lockburn open and meeting our requirements. We need to integrate. A few months later, very courageous President Harry Truman issued an executive order, 9981, mandating that all of the services need to integrate. His story is pretty special. If you haven't read that bit of history, I recommend it to you because it is interesting of what was behind his, because he did not have congressional support and all of that, even though he said, but he was a president that said the buck stops here, and he stood up to that declaration. Well, the unit there at Lockburn was assigned to the Tactical Air Command. Tactical Air Command. To me, it sounded like, well, we don't need B-25s. In fact, I don't know what they did with them. But they deactivated that integrated group and reactivated 332nd Fighter Group wing base operation, fifth and final phase of the Tuskegee experience. Flying P-47Ns. In May of 1949, the Air Force held its first gunnery meet. You all heard about Top Guns? Big deal, Top Guns. A few years later, Air Force decided we need to write our history. It's one of the newer services. And they said, in looking at the Top Gun program, 1949 unknown. Went on to name the 1950 and subsequent leaders. Well, guess who the Top Guns were in 1949 of May? Pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group flying the P-47N. We had jets in the program there, but they did not compete jets against reciprocating engines. Well, they did correct the record, and even a number of years later, the trophy was found in the basement of the Air Force Museum. I say all this, giving you those 5 phases of the experience to let you know that the Tuskegee Airmen, you're not only thinking of the Red Tails, which is a very popular, great movie. I'll answer questions about that if they come up. 992 pilots, but all of that necessary support, there's some 12 to 14,000 other people involved. So, yay, I'm a Red Tail, but I also came back and I was a twin engine instructor and taught some of the B-25 pilots. Remember that program. Remember the sacrifices that many of the families made as we were integrated in July of 1949 and scattered around the world. Many untold stories of the families, the children, things that happened to them in the various assignments as they tried to get education for their children and those things. But I say that so that you understand what we contributed. It destroyed the biases, the generalizations, and yes, in some cases, outside racism that was behind Army policy saying blacks can't fly. We can dig ditches, cook food, build roads, drive vehicles, but fly an airplane or do anything technical, it wasn't possible. Thank goodness there's a creditable record out there that proves that to be wrong. We hold that up because it is an important lesson to our youngsters of today who are the America of tomorrow. They need not repeat that, but they need to understand it because it brings out the importance of education, believing in yourself, capability, finding your talents, and reaching out to those areas that both of our organizations espouse now, a strong aviation and aerospace industry, if you will, in these United States of America. Thank you very much. God bless America.
Well, I think we have a few questions, rather a few moments if you'd like to ask any of the airmen a couple questions. I'm sure there's probably some rather interested folks who want to hear it right from the source. So, anybody?
You didn't plan a question there?
That would be my 12-year-old son, of course. Or are you going to come up and do it? Just come here. We're improvising. This question.
So, how is it like to put your life on the front line, but then come home and not be respected?
I didn't tell him to do that, incidentally.
Okay, we are. Well, that's a pretty interesting question. Wasn't comfortable, certainly. Many come down the gangplank and still there's a sign, whites this way, blacks this way. It took our country on in, although you might say our experience was an early civil rights action without calling it that, because this large group of blacks accomplished a job when at that time our country thought you get a group of blacks together, there's going to be riots and all kinds of unsatisfactory situations. That turned out not to be true. But as I say, there are many different reactions throughout based on where some of us were assigned. I got along well in the assignments that I had in early integration. I went to places where my family didn't get there, but fortunately change came pretty quickly after. So there's a lot of stories in that. But I put it this way. Fortunately, there was a togetherness in a way, although there was segregation in our country, the fact that everybody wanted to participate when we declared war. There were the job opportunities in the industry building up for war support. So that was a change because our country had just come out of 10 years of depression, a change that affected everybody. So there was an attitude there that kind of overrode race and differences because we all had the same desire, help our country win, and what was it, another car in the driveway and another bottle of milk on the front porch.
Ma'am. Sorry, sir. Looking at the light.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks and service that you and your colleagues do to this country. How do we get more black youth exposed to and interested in aviation? What would you suggest as some ways to do that?
I'll respond to that, and maybe others might have a comment. I think it's unfortunate that our communications and so on before our young people make it very popular to bounce a basketball or throw a football. Would you ever see anything about becoming a mechanic or an astronaut? To me, that's where the problem is. Unfortunately, I also feel that one of the parts of our education system is counselors. I've been into a lot of schools, and very few of them have well-trained top-rate counselors because they tell the women, you can't be an architect. No, you don't want to do that. They need to be bringing out the talents of every youngster that goes in the room to its highest level. One of the areas we need to look at. Anybody have a comment want to make on that?
About a year ago, I spoke to the Cardozo High School group downtown in a lawyer's office. Most of my talking has been over the years to young people about the opportunities in aviation. And the response is very good, I think. We have young people who want to be involved in aviation. We are fortunate in the East Coast chapter to have two people who do an outstanding job. Now, Major McGee doesn't like to talk about it because it's his daughter, Yvonne McGee, and Norman Evans over here, who we've sent young people to the academy. We've got a young man who has won acrobatics competition in this area. So there is an opportunity for it, and most of us old guys try to tell, and I'm old, but I'm younger than everybody else up here, except Jim Pride. But Jim Pride and I are we both came into the service here in Washington, D.C. We are both natives of Washington, D.C. And we're very proud of these men who came back and taught us. I didn't have the opportunity to shoot anyone down, but I got the opportunity to be taught how to do that by a gentleman who shot down 3 German planes and 2 on consecutive days, Captain Jackson. Jim Pride had the opportunity to fly in B-25s. In my class, 45I, 2 of my classmates were killed in a B-25 accident the day before I was discharged. So it's one of those things that all of us who have been associated with the Tuskegee Airmen we go out and talk to young people, and I hope this group that's here today will tell some of their buddies, say, hey, you ought to think about coming into to aviation, because it's something you can do, and they can say, well, I saw that little fella, Bill Fauntleroy, and I was a little guy who had not finished high school, but was able to pass the test and be trained as a single-engine pilot. I had 3 of the 4 phases finished when the war ended. Now, Colonel McGee, my class seems to think that because we were in training, the war ended. But we know that's not true. But we thought when we went into primary, the Germans quit, and soon as we started basic training, and we were one of the first groups to fly the AT-6 in basic. And when we started flying, the Japanese quit. And then, so we sort of think we caused it to end. But no, I am so proud to be sitting next to Colonel McGee and those guys who went before me. And this is what I want the young people to understand. They came back and taught us what they knew. And I think, very frankly, that my class was ready for combat after basic. Advanced was just some more training that we were getting. And the young people ought to know that, and we as Tuskegee Airmen do let them know that they can do it. And I always say, if you look at me, if I could do it, you can.
We have time for one more question. Is that the Cardozo table over there? Please. Can you say that again? Oh boy. What do you think of the current use of drones in the military?
We need a strategist here to
That's a tough one.
Well, change does come about, and change is always a problem. We need the surveillance. We need to find ways to reduce the loss of our men and women who are in uniform. Drones happens to be one way to do that. I think the unfortunate thing is that such capability sometimes can go beyond what the original design was. So, yeah, they can go up and observe you and I along with that. So every program has 2 sides. Hopefully the best side of that will be that they're used properly and wisely.
Thank you. I'm going to wager a guess that probably the drone question, the unmanned one, is probably one of the first times this has been brought to the Tuskegee group, and you handled it very nicely. So we're going to wrap up the question and answer session right now. I'm going to pass things back over to David, but one more round of applause for these great gents.
Boy, it only goes to show, huh? You can be soft-spoken and small and still be a heck of a fighter. Gentlemen, you are quite impressive, and we thank you so much. So let's get to not only why we're here to have heard of their experience, but it's time to present them with the award. The award will be accepted by Colonel McGee and by Dr. Ware for the National Tuskegee Airmen Headquarters. We present the award annually to those who have a record of lifetime achievement in a single event or a series of acts by an individual, a team, or by a corporation or organization that reaffirms the Wright brothers' standard of excellence in aviation. This year's nomination read, the Tuskegee Airmen refers to all who were involved in the so-called Tuskegee experience, the Army Air Corps program to train African Americans to fly and maintain combat aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen included pilots, navigators, bombardiers, maintenance and support staff, instructors, and all the personnel who kept the planes in the air. The Tuskegee Airmen overcame segregation and prejudice to become one of the most highly respected fighter groups of World War II. They proved conclusively that African Americans could fly and maintain sophisticated combat aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen's achievements, together with the men and women who supported them, paved the way for full integration of the U.S. military. On November 6, 1998, President Clinton approved Public Law 105-355, which established the Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Site at Moton Field in Tuskegee, Alabama, to commemorate and interpret the heroic actions of the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the 2013 Donald D. Engen Trophy to the Tuskegee Airmen. Congratulations. It's an honor to be able to present this award. One other special presentation. We talked about youth, the importance of promoting youth going forward. It is a tenet of the Aero Club of Washington. Mr. Fauntleroy, we'd like to present to you a check from the Aero Club of Washington to support your efforts to promote youth in aviation. Small, but he asked if the check was made out to him. I was afraid to say no. He didn't tell you he started out as an MP. Thank you, sir. This closes out the 2013 Luncheon Series. I am certain that 2014 President Pete Dumont and the board will work to deliver another spectacular slate of speakers. As a reminder, December 13th is the Wright Memorial Dinner, hosted by your Aero Club. The prestigious NAA Wright Brothers Memorial Trophy will be presented the former FAA Administrator and current President and CEO of the Aerospace Industries Association, Marion Blakely. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending today and for another year of support. We look forward to seeing you at the Wright Dinner and then again in January as we launch our 2014 Luncheon Series. Have a wonderful day.